Hi, friends. Welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Clouds. And as I said many times before, this transformation is international. And some people are not even waiting for AI, machine learning, and all these technologies to mature. There are people like Jon Warner who have traveled to more than 100 countries and lived in 8 of them. John, tell us about you. How did you become this international traveler and inventor and so on in so many areas? How did you end up? Were you always like this?
I think I probably was like this as a boy, very curious, just in terms of exploring my environment. And I think it helped greatly that my father had an itinerant job in the construction world, which meant he was always the first man on every job. So we were there for 6 months, 9 months, maybe 12 months if I was lucky. As a result, I know I went to 10 separate schools before I was 16. Because he kept moving, and then he started moving internationally and doing construction work overseas, out of England where I was born, and that gave me the bug for traveling. As a result, I've been very comfortable not just visiting countries, but when opportunities from a career perspective came up to go and live in some of those countries, which opens your horizons. Talk about beyond the clouds. It's beyond your bounds. And I like that whole idea. I should say as well, I'm a philosopher by undergraduate, so a good philosopher should be pursuing the grand unifying theory of the universe, and I think that needs lots of travel to go and see what's different elsewhere.
That's very true. That's been my experience, but I'm nowhere close to what you've done. Just living in Mexico for 5 months changed my entire perspective. And
Mhm.
I've been visiting many countries where Spanish is the first language. It's changed the way I even relate to people who speak Espanol. So, John, tell us about your journey into technology and all the things that you've done. And how did you get into all those things from
Okay.
philosophy?
Well, I have to say, when you've got an undergrad in philosophy, you're not exactly the most popular person to go and hire. It's hardly like being an engineer or a scientist or an accountant or even a lawyer. So I picked a company early on that was very close to me called Ralph M. Parsons. They were physically close, and I could see they were a big building, and I thought I'd go and get myself a job after I graduated. And that gave me an insight into the petrochemical industry. It's where they were. They were design engineers for that industry. I got a bit of a bug early on for that. I went from there into industrial gases with Air Products and Chemicals, which is an American company out of Allentown in Pennsylvania, and then ended up in Exxon, where I took on more and more senior roles over the 7 years I was there. Ended up as a general manager running a very big refinery. And that really got me into the technology field, because what was happening in the late 90s when I was in Exxon, we were starting to use technology to do many things on the data level, in terms of tracking and monitoring, in some cases remotely. And that gave me the bug for technology. I got a little bored with the oil industry after a while. It wasn't the most worthy industry to be part of. So I left to go into management consulting work. Um, and that took me almost by accident into health and healthcare, which is where I've been ever since. And I've been in this space ever since the late 90s, where I could translate some of what I'd learned in the broad innovation technology realm into the challenges that healthcare was facing. And as I picked up more and more work in that space, I got to work across all of healthcare, so all of life sciences, and then all other parts of the healthcare sector, and to do a deep dive on technology. And technology, as you know, in that period took off very quickly. It was the birth of the internet. It was the birth of electronic health records. Smart devices were suddenly started to be used. So it was a very useful period in my life just to be around while that was all starting to happen.
That's amazing. In fact, I spent about 6 years in the biopharmaceutical space, digital e-pharma, as we used to call it.
Yep.
And we were a little early. We were able to help use expert systems to guide how to reduce toxicity of new medicines. But one of the things I noticed, and I think, John, you had a much more interesting experience. Generally, the people who are respected in healthcare are the ones who have deep expertise in the healthcare space. People who are physicians, nurses, doctors, pharmaceutical scientists, and so on. How did you, as an outsider, as a philosopher, a business guy, management consultant, get into it and stay into it? And what have been the rewards of being in the healthcare space?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Early on, you have to fake it till you make it. You clearly are not a physician, you're not a clinician in any way, shape, or form. So you learn by osmosis, just by being around a lot of people, you learn the jargon of the industry. And obviously here I am more than 20 years later. I'm able to do other things now. I did end up doing a PhD in psychology. Therefore, I got very interested into mental health, even from a clinical perspective. But even that's not enough to go and pretend that I practice in any way as a clinician. So the other side of that equation for me is I think I've always taken the view that professional and clinician input is absolutely critical in terms of deploying innovation. So I'm a very strong advocate for customer discovery work, and they have to weigh in on that. We've got far too many point solutions in the world that are built independently of the people using these things. You don't know what their legacy equipment is, how it needs to interface with it. If you don't know that, you're really on a hiding to nothing. So it's a combination of learning as I've gone, but making sure that I don't lose the sight that they're the ones who have to do the job day in, day out, not me. So that means customer discovery has to be deep and sound.
That's very true. In fact, many of us technologists who got into healthcare did so initially for emotional reasons, or seeing real problems. In our case, it was cancer, seeing a few friends die of cancer. But
Yes.
then when we started understanding and doing customer discovery, we realized regulations are a big part of it. And so I have a question that I'm seeing today. One is that you hear these news reports that immortality is not far. A day will come within 10 years that people can live forever. On the other hand, access to basic medicines is still not available, even in the United States and in Western Europe. Sometimes people have to stand in line for 6 months to get an MRI scan done. So, what's going on, and how can we improve any of this? How can we all become immortal?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure you and I are going to be alive long enough to live through the answer to that question. But I think longevity is really interesting. And again, you've got to bifurcate it a little bit. Clearly in the US, we've been going backwards for the last 5 years. Our lifespan is actually shortened. We're down 3 years on where we were. We're now at the bottom of the Western world in terms of what we're doing. Burgeoning population with more chronic illnesses. And as you say, that's not a good thing. On the other hand, we are evolving technology that enhances health span, so a longer life and a healthier one. And then I think the immortality thing, I mean, it's on the horizon to the extent we can enhance, in all sorts of biotechnology ways, and then not the least of which AI makes its contribution. So, conceivably we could upload our brain, get a new body, and live forever, I guess. But I don't think we can take our eye off the fact that we've got real human issues right now. So I like to see technology deployed to solve for the people who are in need today, much more than worrying about some theoretical future in 50 or 100 years' time, which might come about as technology evolves. But I don't think we can ignore all the people, the vulnerable populations around the world that need our help, as you alluded. And I think there's many of them, sadly.
That's true. There are neglected diseases around the world, infections that have been around and with no medicines in sight. Uh,
Yes.
what will it take to democratize at least access to medicine and hopefully access to research? Uh, are we going in the right direction? Are there any hurdles? Are they regulatory hurdles or the business hurdles? What's stopping the access to medicine at this point?
I think, in my opinion, I think we are a little better than we were 25 years ago, and we have, the internet and the democratization of that to thank mainly. I think we're now aware of the extent to which there are issues around the world in the way that we weren't. And I think we've therefore seen foundational money and institutional money and government money flowing more readily into solving some of these world issues. You know, we know major infectious diseases have been tackled pretty much in the last 70 years as we've got more to grips with that. You've only got to look at the Gates Foundation, for example, and what they're doing in continents like Africa to go and see those things happen. That said, I think we again don't really understand how these things happen on the ground. So just the sheer availability of medicines, we know how often how to cure a disease, but we don't necessarily have the medicines to do so. And that's true all over the world. I was listening to a podcast yesterday that was just saying that in the state of Gabon, for example, in Africa, there are no medicines for a dozen different major diseases, and they spend months waiting for a very small supply. And when they get it, it covers perhaps 10% of the affected population. That has to change. And we can't do it all with foundational and non-profit money. I think governments have to step up more and more in terms of being aware of these things. We saw from the pandemic how much that can affect us all if we don't.
I completely agree with you. And again, hats off to foundations like the Gates Foundation. They have been the biggest contributor for not just research, but also for bringing healthcare and
Yes,
healthcare policy all over India, like in the range of like $200 million per year. But
yes.
that cannot alone solve problems because there are major, major problems. In what ways do you think newer technologies like AI, machine learning, generative AI, or any of the other technologies around it, how is it helping? And what are the biggest contributions? What are the trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it's making a massive difference. And I think in the last 20 years, maybe 25, again, we've seen a huge shift in terms of consumer acceptance of technology. And I think that's what's driving institutional acceptance rather than the other way around. Just take the smartphone as one example of that. I mean, that's a 2007. It's really a very short period of time. But in this time, people have got very comfortable using apps, using it to do all sorts of things in their normal lives, and healthcare has become part of it now. We know we have close to 120 million Americans who are using a health app on their phone in one way, shape, or form, and they're using it for monitoring purposes. So I think our job is to be ready on the other side of healthcare institutionally to be ready for that consumer acceptance. We know the younger population, the digital natives, so-called, are very ready with all of that. And I think that lays the foundation then for more sophisticated technologies like AI and generative AI now to play their part. So there'll be less resistance as we go forward, I hope. There's obviously some infrastructure needs, though, that are needed. I'm going to use your country of India as one example. I was there a year ago, and I was very pleased to see how fast they're rolling out 5G, for example. I think that's an obvious infrastructure need just in terms of speed of data and data transfer at all levels. We're running into legacy problems here in the US because our legacy 4G system has been slow to be replaced. So India has outstripped America in terms of its promulgation of 5G as just one example. So we're starting to see more calls drop now, let alone anything else. So I think you've got to build infrastructure, and that's perhaps one of the major obstacles, much more so than the regulatory obstacles.
That's true. That's true. When we get stuck with one huge investment in one technology, that can slow things down.
Right.
Do you think the leapfrogging that's happening on the telecom side, people getting access directly to 4G, 5G, could help access to medicine now that a lot of apps are there? And have you seen evidences of that in different places that you travel to?
Yes, yes, and yes. And I think we're seeing obviously pockets of it in terms of innovation. Some countries are further ahead. I'm very encouraged by a number of Asian economies that have adopted. I mean, I think of South Korea, again, back in COVID, very quickly being able to spin up apps that the population were using at the 90% plus level. I think this is the promise of technology. I do think we've got one little caveat in all of that, though, generally, when it comes to digital health. And I think that's just making sure this has safety, security, and real clinical efficacy. I think we're in danger of getting into a place where we've got so much technology that we don't really know much about. And I think that's a problem because we always want to make sure this technology is safe to use and works in a real world way. So I think standards and assessment criteria are going to be a very important part of this now.
That's true. Recently, one of the large HMOs or health companies, their data got leaked and is being now sold in the dark web. Very dangerous stuff.
Yeah,
And of course,
cybersecurity is alive and well, as a as a need, but not everyone's taking it as serious as they need to. So I think one level it's safety and security and protecting people's privacy, but I also think it's about assessment of that efficacy side of things. You and I can spin up a technology, but who are you and I to know whether we've done a good job, even if we sail into a vacant space? So I think we do need standards in this space. If we were building a house, we'd have standards galore. Making sure it doesn't fall down and hurt anyone, including the occupants. We don't have that broadly in digital health. We have it for digital therapeutics to a degree, but we don't have it for the vast majority of the market.
this is interesting that you mentioned the lack of regulations or at least standards. At least 20 years ago, when I was in it, it looked like a highly regulated space. Any and everything you wanted to move, you had to work with HIPAA regulations, you had to work with FDA regulations. Are you saying that things have changed quite a bit and probably the pendulum has switched to the other side?
Not so much that. I think healthcare is highly regulated in many ways, and I think clinicians are regulated. If you just think about credentialing, as one example of that, I mean, doctors are obviously regulated as are nurses in all sorts of ways, and then so are lots of other parts of healthcare. I think it's technology specifically that's not got standards and regulation. I mean, AI is a very good example. It's taken us up until the last 6 months or so to wrap our head around that we have to have standards around AI and the safe use of and deployment of AI. The White House issued some guidelines under a directive only 3 months ago. So we're often very late to catch up with technology because it keeps evolving. And I think politicians struggle to keep up with this, and therefore the people who then write the legislation are slow to keep up with it. So and that's okay as long as you're not developing technology at such a rate that most of it ends up as unregulated. And I fear in the digital health apps world, that's certainly true. So we're very, very far behind the 8 ball.
John, you've lived in more than 8 countries, traveled to more than 101. And I guess you may be even losing count at this rate. And you have worked in multiple industries and multiple capacities. Where did you enjoy the most, both personally and professionally? And how has John changed over the years?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. My favorite place to be on the planet, I lived in Australia for 15 years and it's still my favorite country overall. It's a very big country, the size of the United States, very diverse. The people are great. I think Australia punches above its weight generally when it comes to technology, and it's very accepting of it. So that's a good thing. So I do enjoy it. I do enjoy living in Southern California, which is where I live now. It's very temperate and it's a nice place to live. And the state also has a very can-do attitude to innovation in broad terms. So that's encouraging. From a career perspective, I enjoy my career as it is today. I have a very portfolio life. I do nothing but advisory work for venture-backed startups these days. So therefore I get a lot of variety. I get to connect a lot of dots. And I get to network with a lot of people like you, Shankar. So that is a joy because I'm constantly learning from other people as I go. And a conversation today might be a conversation next week or next month because I've met you and you and I have had a conversation. That's great.
I agree with you. I love what I'm doing right now. As long as I figure out how to monetize it appropriately, I will continue doing this the rest of my life. So, John, what advice do you have? A lot of people yearn to have the kind of freedom and flexibility you have in the work you're doing. Of course, one way is to wait till you have gray hair, but there may be other ways in which people who are, multifaceted could get into these roles where they can travel, they can do interesting things, and focus on different industries, if you will.
Yeah.
How should somebody go about doing that?
Well, I'm going to give you what will be a self-serving and biased answer, but I'm an adjunct professor at Redlands University here in California, and I teach entrepreneurship. I am passionate about the fact that every individual should understand entrepreneurship. I don't care whether they ever start a startup or even work for one. Maybe they go and just work in corporate life, do whatever they want to do. But I think understanding entrepreneurship teaches you where work comes from, where a job comes from. So I have a nonprofit which teaches kids entrepreneurship as early as 9 and 10, and it goes all the way through to college years. And I love that work because it allows them to start to be more entrepreneurially minded, more growth mindset orientated, more open to innovation and change. And I think that's how we need to cope in the world these days. We can't stand still for very long. There is no room for fixed mindset. So that my advice would be to get involved with entrepreneurship, local accelerators, become a mentor, get involved. You'll be amazed where it will take you.
Thank you, John, for saying that. I've been involved first as a recipient of education in the mid 90s, and that changed my life. I even took breaks from doing businesses and got into nonprofits and social sector. But interestingly, if we read the letter of the law, none of us is a full-time lifetime employee anymore,
That's
right?
fine.
All of us are contractors in the sense that employment at will can be fired. So to that extent, not having that entrepreneurial edge would mean getting laid off and not knowing what to do.
That's right.
So isn't
Exactly.
that crazy that people think that they have a full-time job, that means they have a lifetime, and 6 months later the company writes a nice letter and they're out of it?
Yeah, I think it's a very odd situation and made worse with COVID. I think the world of work has changed dramatically. And I think it's the people that can be agile mentally, in terms of what they do, are the ones who are going to go and profit from that change. So I'd be part of the change, not part of the changed.
That's true. And given that not to be part of the changed, is it how important would it be to learn to use these new technologies because they're changing really fast? But for example, a lot of what I do now is using AI. I use
Yes.
Gen AI every day, and I
Yes.
guess you do too. Without that, I wouldn't be half as productive.
Yes, I agree. I'm still struggling a little bit. Maybe I've got a bit of fixed mindset myself. Like you, I've tried, maybe 10 different chatbot platforms other than ChatGPT, and I find it fascinating. I am playing with the technology, but there are some things I don't allow it to do. So all my LinkedIn posts I write personally. I don't let AI write them. So maybe that's just my problem that I'm not letting it do it. But I can see the changes are coming and they're coming fast. So yeah, we have to be very much abreast of this and not be scared of it. I think technology, by and large, is an enabler. It's not an end in and of itself. So we should learn it very quickly.
So you don't see robots taking over the world anytime soon, then?
No, not while I'm around. I think it's going to be a little longer than that. I mean, we've got robots in the world, right, and doing so-called dumb things, but they're doing smarter and smarter things. They're no longer quite so dumb. They're not just doing trivial sort of chores around the house anymore. So I think that world's changing quickly. And 30 years from now, I think we're going to see them everywhere. I'm excited by that by and large. Again, we need good governance systems, policy standards, safety, security, all of that good stuff. But if we can put that infrastructure in place, I'm excited by the prospect.
And I want to thank you personally for having gotten into entrepreneurship as as a service, as a nonprofit. What inspired you to make it a nonprofit? You could as well have gone the incubator, accelerator, or venture capital route.
Yeah. It was really because we wanted to go and teach the under 21s, and we didn't think that was a business we wanted to make for profit. We could therefore, have more flexibility in going that way. And, we've now trained over 500 people in entrepreneurship. So we're proud of that. That's 500 people who've got an open mind for it in the future. Maybe they're going to become, the serial entrepreneurs of the future and changing our world a little bit here and there. So I think it's an attempt to be again worthy and to give back, and I think that's best done in a non-profit environment.
All I can say, John, is may you continue to serve and continue to travel and continue to integrate the world. And That's what I see in you, that no matter where you go, you bring not only yourself, but you bring back some of the wisdom from those places. So thank you for that. And to people who are listening, this is the joy I have in talking to people. Uh, Technology is changing, people are changing, but it's the confluence of bringing people and technologies together in a meaningful way. That's going to be the future. I don't think robots or machines are going to control us. I think we will still stay in charge as long as we are abreast and are responsible for the future. So thanks a lot, John. Please continue the good work, and I'm sure we'll meet one of these days face to face.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. And thanks very much, Shankar.